So I'll go ahead and open us up with a prayer. So, the Lord be with you. Let's pray. O God, you made us in your own image and redeemed us through Jesus, your Son. Look with compassion on the whole human family. Take away the arrogance and hatred which infect our hearts. Break down the walls that separate us. Unite us in bonds of love. And work through our struggles and confusion to accomplish your purposes on earth, that in your good time all nations and races may serve you in harmony around your heavenly throne. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Amen. We're very pleased today to have Charles Kowalski. If that name sounds familiar, it's sponsored by Vesta Kowalski. Charles is an associate professor in the Department of Cultural and Social Studies at Tokai University, Kanagawa, Japan, which is about an hour outside of Tokyo. He's also a professed member of the Order of Ecumenical Franciscans and has an abiding interest in the world's religions, particularly Buddhism. And so today we'll be hearing about the will of the world and the will of God recalibrating our compass. Thank you, Charles.
The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
As we words mouth meditations for our hearts be always acceptable to the our sight, God, our strength and mercy. Self. Chapter. I feel that might have been superfluous because Calvin already started off with a prayer that was just perfect for today's theme. So as he introduced me, I'm a professor at the Department of Cultural and Social Studies at Tokai University in Kanagawa, Japan. I've been living overseas for over 20 years now. So when I look back on life in the United States, I feel like I'm looking at American life from the perspective of an outside observer. And looking at the current state of things in the world in general, and in my home country in particular, this is how I often feel. As though I'm looking at a world turned upside down. That the news that reaches me, like through social media and other means, says that the prevailing atmosphere in the United States and much of the rest of the world seems to have come full circle from the country that I grew up in. That in many cases, the people who most loudly and proudly claim the title of Christian also tend to be the ones whose beliefs and conduct seem farthest away from the actual teachings of Jesus. And that I've seen, of course, some very bold and inspiring responses to this state of affairs, not least among them from this wonderful Episcopal church in which I was raised by this wise woman right here. But also feeling that people of faith who feel their faith is a call to be concerned about equality and social justice and respecting the dignity of every human being tend sometimes to feel isolated and, if you will, caught in a crossfire between Christian nationalists on one side and, on the other side, secular humanists who view religion in general and Christianity in particular as part of the problem. Now, would you say that that's a reasonably fair assessment of the situation on the ground? I'm seeing a lot of nods. Yes. So, my feeling was, what can we to do to recalibrate our compass? Is there a focal point, an objective standard to which, where people of faith and secular humanists can take as a starting point, as a fundamental point from which to begin a discussion? And I feel that there is. I feel that we can start from the obvious, which is that the future of the world is going to be determined by us. That it will be determined by the collective will of human beings. That the world is a democracy in which we are all citizens by virtue of being members of the species Homo sapiens. Now, a secular humanist might look at that and say, well, of course, what else is there? And a person of faith might look at that and say, well, where does the will of God fit into all of this? And, of course, being a person of faith myself, every day I pray, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. But I'm also an English teacher. And as an English teacher, I can't help but notice that the passive voice invites the question of, by whom? And two of our great mystic saints from the 16th century have given us an answer to that question. So, you may believe that we're going to be guided solely by the will of humanity, or you may believe that we are to be guided by the will of God. But in any case, St. Teresa and St. Ignatius are here to remind us that direct divine intervention in human affairs does not necessarily happen now as often as it might once have done. So, whichever viewpoint you're starting from, it would seem that we can agree that the hands on the wheel of the future of the world belong to us, Homo sapiens. We are it. And I see some people who are looking at me with an expression of terror at that prospect. So, just by show of hands, how many people find that cause for hope? Oh, okay. The number is not zero. That's encouraging. Because with respect to the human race, I think one can basically fall into three categories. First, that our basic nature is good, but we are capable of evil. Second, that our basic nature is evil, but we are capable of good. And third, there's nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. That the entire concepts are subjective and culturally determined. So, just by a quick show of hands, can I ask which of these most nearly expresses your own personal view? Number one? Most. Number two? Number three? Okay, so, all right. All right, most people have put themselves in the first category, and that's where I would put myself too. Because if you were to start from the second category, if you were to say that humans are intrinsically evil, it would also invite the question, compared to what?
That.
So, C.S. Lewis once, when he was asked, before his conversion, when he was asked why he didn't believe in God, his stock answer was, because the world makes no sense and people are evil. But after he had given that answer a number of times, he started thinking, now wait a minute. If I can say that about the only world I know, and the only sentient species I know in it, what am I comparing it to? If I say that the world makes no sense and people are bad, then I must have some idea of a sensible world populated by good people And where did I get that? So, we are the dominant species on this planet. And we got there by virtue of our ability to live and work and imagine and create together. That is the distinguishing feature of our species. We are the great cooperators. And so, just about anywhere you go in the world, even though which acts are good, which acts are considered evil, may differ in particulars, there is one general sense that you'll find, I think, as a common thread running through all of humanity, which defines good as that which is conducive to living together in a harmonious society, and evil as that which works counter to that purpose. So if it's true, like, we are capable of evil, we are capable of being tremendously selfish and cruel. But if that were our basic nature, if that were our default setting, to be cruel or even to be indifferent, if we had been a species of solitary hunters, for example, we could never have gotten to the point of being able to build this cathedral or this computer. So, we are no angels, but we can imagine angels. We are not perfect, but we can imagine perfection. We can perceive the gap between what we are and what we feel we should be, or what we imagine we could be, what we aspire to be. So, if the future of the world is to be determined by us, so the next question is, what is our will? So, let me just ask people to call out answers. What do you want out of life? Security. Sorry.
Peace of mind.
Peace of mind.
Equality.
Equality.
Joy.
Sorry?
Love.
Love.
Justice.
Justice. Liberty.
Fine.
Kindness. Yes. So, all of the answers that I'm hearing tend to come back to certain basic human needs. So we could say, I think safely, that the will of human beings is to meet their basic needs. Now, if we were to reduce people's basic needs to the list of essentials, we have certain physical needs, life, and that which is necessary to sustain life, food, clothing, shelter, and all that. Safety, so physical and social safety or security. Health, freedom, love, respect in the sense of being treated with the respect and dignity worthy of any human being. And I heard people say equality and justice, which would mean having the same for all human beings that you would wish for yourself, which is another very important point that I'll come back to in a minute. Happiness and the things that are essential for happiness, and then fulfillment, the sense that you have a purpose on earth and you are accomplishing or have accomplished that purpose. So these, I think we can say, are a list of universal needs. And there is a hierarchy or a sequence. So number one, life is first on the list because if you don't have that, then there's no need for any of the others.
That's right.
Number 8, fulfillment is last on the list because you may get to the very end of life before you know whether you've been able to achieve that purpose. But the idea that there are basic human needs and that there's a sequence, that lower order needs need to be met before higher order needs can be addressed. This was made famous in the 1940s by Abraham Maslow with his hierarchy of needs. So physiological, safety, love and belonging, esteem, and finally self-actualization. So he is the one who made it famous, even though it's not necessarily original to him. Like if anyone has ever practiced yoga or Eastern medicine, you'll see a lot of overlap between Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the sequence of chakras, like the points on the body at which energy accumulates, starting from the bottom of the torso and going up to the top of the head, each one associated with a different human need or desire. And you'll see that even though there's a little bit of discrepancy, the sequence is almost the same. Now, I'm speaking here of human needs as distinct from human rights. Even though they are close, they're not exactly the same thing. Like human needs, essential for life and well-being, mainly physical and psychological, and therefore I think we could safely say these are universal and indisputable. When we talk about human rights, we're talking about freedoms and protections that a government is, or other authority is, under some obligation to provide or protect. And as soon as the question of obligation comes in, then it becomes open for debate. Like when the United Nations published its Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it did involve a great deal of discussion among the member states. So not all of them are always essential for everyone. Like we can talk about the right to full participation in government, but one could make the case, well, that applies only to adult citizens. Then there are certain rights that apply to people who have been accused of a crime, and maybe most of us will go our whole lives without ever having to avail ourselves of those rights. So not all rights are needs, and not all needs are rights in the sense that they can be guaranteed. One quote attributed to Benjamin Franklin when, back in the early days of the United States, he was asked by someone, "Where is all this happiness that we were promised?" And his reply was, "You're only guaranteed the pursuit of happiness. You have to catch it yourself." But that having been said, if we look at our list of human needs and cross-reference it with the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, you do see a considerable amount of overlap, that most of actually all of the items on our list of needs are to a greater or lesser degree protected by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So, we say that our future is to be determined by human beings, and that the will of human beings is to meet their basic needs. It's not too great a stretch, I feel, from there to say, therefore, the collective will of humanity, the will of the world, if you will, naturally seeks an equilibrium where everyone's basic needs are met. That equilibrium, I feel, is what we call peace. And the mechanism by which it's restored once it's been disrupted is what we call justice.
Okay.
So I'm borrowing an idea here from the neurologist Antonio Damasio, which sees a society like the body of an organism as being subject to homeostasis, as being a homeostatic system. In other words, just like cells within the body, when conditions go outside what is acceptable for life, the entire system works together to try to bring those conditions back within acceptable parameters. And as cells are to a body, so people are to a society. could be a local society or it could be a global society. But in any event, once the equilibrium has been disrupted, the entire system works together to restore it. And not just to status quo ante, but in some cases better than before. So, just as the body repairs itself after an illness, then some major disruption to society, such as a war or a repressive regime, is treated the same way as an illness, that the society works together to right the balance and to do what's necessary to prevent a recurrence. After the American Civil War, we saw the abolition of slavery. After the Second World War, we saw the establishment of the United Nations and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So, not just trying to get back to the equilibrium, but to build back better. So any action by any individual that moves the world closer to that equilibrium, we would say is in harmony with the will. In a single word, accordant. And any action that moves it away from the equilibrium, we could call against the will, or in a single word, discordant. And it's been known for a long time. So if you help others meet their needs, it will help you meet yours. If you hinder others from meeting their needs, it will hinder you from meeting yours. This, I think we could say, is a moral universal. This is a through line running through all the great religious and philosophical traditions of the world. This is basically the golden rule, expressed not as a moral injunction, but as a statement of cause and effect, action and consequence. Jesus, of course, made this famous. So this is at the heart of the teachings of Christianity. But it's not unique to Christianity. It has parallels in many of the other world's, nearly all of the other world's religions, as well as secular humanist traditions. That it appears just logical on the face of it. What you find hateful in others, you don't do yourself. And the reason that it works, that this is so popular as a moral principle, I feel, is that it expresses the innate moral sentiments that we as human beings are born with. So this is based on the work of Frans de Waal, the Dutch primatologist who tries to understand the origins of human morality by comparing the behavior of human beings with those of other large-brained primates. I'll come back to that in a moment. But looking at all of the religious traditions and moral codes in the world, you can see certain through lines, even though they may differ in details. So, empathy, put yourself in another's shoes, look at the world from another's point of view. Fairness, so equal reward for an equal contribution. Reciprocity, do good to those who do good to you. And reconciliation. So, when human relationships are broken, a mechanism should exist for mending. So, these are common to religious and moral traditions worldwide, but you don't necessarily have to subscribe to any of them to understand these principles. Children understand them. Babies understand them. So babies, before they reach their first birthday, watching a puppet show, will be able to tell the difference between the helpful puppet and the hurtful puppet, the pro-social one and the anti-social one, and express a preference for the helpful one. So you don't have to be old enough to have language. You don't even have to be human, because these behaviors indicative of these principles, have been observed in other large-brained primates. So again, this comes from a number of primatologists, including Franz de Waal, who famously staged a reenactment of the parable of the workers in the vineyard with capuchin monkeys. Has anyone ever seen that? Yes, I see some nods here. That you have two monkeys who perform the same task, and both of them receive a cucumber as a reward. Then they'll happily both go on performing the same task. But the moment he made a change, and he gave one a cucumber and the other one a grape, then the one who got the cucumber saw that its neighbor had got the grape and took the cucumber. So yes, you don't have to be human to have a sense of fairness. But other experiments have also shown that a monkey who is given the choice of performing a task that will bring a food reward only to it, versus one that will bring a reward to itself and its neighbor, will, more often than not, choose to benefit itself and its neighbor. And conversely, if a monkey can feed itself only at the cost of dealing a painful electrical shock to its neighbor in the next cage, will go without food for a week at a time, sooner than cause suffering to its neighbor. Now, whether you believe that we evolved from lower primates, or whether you believe that we were created as an order above and separate from them, I think one thing that we should all be able to agree on is we should be able to do at least as well as monkeys. And so this concept that those who are kind to others benefit themselves, those that are cruel to others bring misfortune on themselves. This comes from the book of Proverbs. This idea is nothing new. We've known for millennia that this is true. What is new is the insights that we've been given over the past couple of decades from evolutionary biology and psychology and medical science and neuroscience as to why it's true. That those who are helpful, we know, receive external rewards from society and also internal rewards. We know that helpful actions, kind actions, bring physical benefits in terms of increased secretions of the hormones and neurotransmitters that are associated with well-being of the body. Dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. Boosts the immune system and diminishes the effects of aging. Which probably explains why my mother is going strong for after all these years. And inconsequently, so on the other side, those who act in hurtful ways, they receive their punishment from society and also internally in terms of the toll that it takes on them psychologically. So, especially we see this in people who have been coerced into upholding unjust systems, possibly against their will. We'll say a little bit more about that later on, but in extreme cases, symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder from the perpetrator's point of view. So those who do good to others help themselves. Those who hurt others hurt themselves. I've heard the more cynical among us say, well, You see, this just goes to show you, as a species, we're hopeless. We'll never do anything for anyone else unless there's something in it for us, even if that something is only an intangible psychological benefit. And that statement, I think, it's true as far as it goes. We will not do something for others without benefiting ourselves, but not because we're unwilling to, but because it can't be done. It's physically impossible. That if we do good to others, it will invariably benefit us. That's not a choice we make, it is how we are made. So, a picture emerges that we come pre-programmed with the software that we need to create a harmonious world. So we've got the ingredients, and we've got the recipe, and we have for as long as history can remember. So, why is it so seldom that we succeed in cooking one? And psychology and biology give us a clue as to the answer to that one, which is that we have an innate capacity for compassion and empathy. But it has limits. And the limits are generally defined by kinship. That our willingness to put ourselves on the line for others decreases in proportion, or in inverse proportion to the number of genes that we share with that person. So in the early 20th century, the mathematician and biologist Jack Haldane was asked, "Would you jump into a river to save a stranger?" And his answer was, "No. But I would for 2 brothers or 8 cousins." So he was joking, but the humor expressed an idea that was later found published as an actual mathematical formula. That we are willing to put ourselves on the line for others as long as C is less than BR, where C is the cost to ourselves, B is the benefit to others, and R is the degree of relation between them and us. Because the first and great commandment that nature has imprinted on all living things is, "Thou shalt propagate thy genes." So, by this logic expressed in the 1960s by Haldane, is that our willingness to help one another is dependent on the number of genes that we have in common. So this, when we talk about the circle of care, so Franz de Waal envisions it more as a cone of care. So with ourself at the apex, then family and clan, community, tribe and nation, all humanity, all living things. And then the water lines at the bottom represent our level of stress. The lower they are, the wider the circle expands. The higher they are, the more it contracts. So in times of peace and plenty, people feel more caring, more tolerant, more generous. In times of danger and scarcity, the circle contracts and people have less resources to spare for those who are less related to them. And those whose goal is to create an unjust regime that favors some at the expense of others, they know this, and they know that the way of getting people to focus only on the welfare of their group is to keep them scared and angry, to keep the stress levels high. So the mental software that we become pre-programmed with will take us maybe to the bottom of the second tier from the top of this pyramid. They will go as far as helping our clan, those who are related to us, and caring for those who are related and being wary of those who are no relation. And for at least a good 95% of the time that Homo sapiens has been on this earth, nature considered that good enough. Because at those times we were living in bands determined by kinship. And then, about 10,000 years ago, came something called civilization. We moved from being hunter-gatherers to agrarian societies and then urban societies, which meant that we had to live and work in close quarters with people who were not related, who looked different from us, who sounded different from us. And that was something that our innate moral software was not yet capable of dealing with. So in order to adjust to that reality, we needed a version upgrade.
That's all.
Our innate software no longer does the trick. We need to engage these big prefrontal cortices of ours to come up with a reason to care for people who are different from us. And that is what the religious and philosophical traditions of the world, I feel, bring to the table. So we have, when moral sentiments by themselves aren't adequate to do the job, we have social norms in terms of legal codes. The idea of, well, yes, you are not related by blood, but you all owe allegiance to the same ruler. You are all citizens of the same state, therefore you need to get together in a harmonious society. If not, then the authority will punish you. Okay. So we have that external pressure. However, that by itself isn't quite sufficient without an intrinsic reason as well. Reason and judgment. And that, again, is what religion and moral philosophy brings to the table. So when Jesus preached the Sermon on the Mount, he took as his starting point what was, at that time, the conventional wisdom. Help your friends, hurt your enemies. Help those who are related to you. Those who are no relation are no concern of yours. And then he said something that was completely radical. Like, if you only love those who love you, if you only do good to those who you expect can do good to you in return, what's special about that? Do not even pagans do that. And if he had lived a couple of millennia later, he could have added, do not even monkeys do that. No. What you are called to do is to look at the world from a God's eye view. That you are children of God, who is the great parent of all humanity. Therefore, your task is to see all human race as your brothers and sisters, and aunts and uncles and cousins. And when Jesus was asked, well, who do you mean by my neighbor? By someone who was clearly hoping to say, well, you don't mean those people, do you? Jesus replied with the parable of the Good Samaritan. And some of you may have seen the meme that's been going around social media that shows Jesus preaching the Sermon on the Mount, and somebody asks, so, excuse me, Jesus, who do you mean when you say, love your neighbor? And Jesus replies, it's whoever you're hoping I won't say.
Well, that's all. And he says,
So, Christianity and other religious traditions as well call us to see the world from God's eye view, without borders. And nearly 2 millennia after Jesus, he found his sentiments echoed by someone whom some would consider an unlikely ally. So if you juxtapose the words of Jesus with the words of Darwin, we can say, whether you start from a top-down perspective of looking at the entire human race as fellow children of the great parent, or whether you look from the bottom-up perspective and say that we all evolved from the same source, it will eventually lead you to the same conclusion, that we are all related, and that there is no reason not to extend to people of other nations and races the same kind of concern and compassion that we would extend to people of our own. Now, I would say that most of the discordance in the world arises from what I would call the great error. I started to say the great lie, but lie implies that the speaker knows it to be untrue and says it with the intent to deceive. And that's not always the case. The people who say it may very well believe it. But the idea that my needs can only be met at the expense of yours, that our needs, the needs of this group, can only be met at the expense of the needs of that group, that all of life is a zero-sum game. More for them means less for us. More for you means less for me. That most of the suffering in the world, I feel, can be traced to such an idea, even though the evidence shows us that this is not true, that promoting the welfare of others promotes your own welfare. Diminishing others diminishes you. Now, this is not to say that conflicts of needs will not arise. Of course they do. So all of life is a process of negotiation and conflict resolution. But this framework, I feel, gives us a mechanism for dealing with such conflicts when they arise, according to the principle of minimum loss. And this is a through line running through the field of conflict resolution, that when there is a conflict of needs, the steps in dealing with it are first, identify who is trying to meet which of their basic needs. 2, is there a way for the basic needs of everyone in this situation to be met? And 3, if not, then is there an objective way of telling whose needs are the more legitimate? And I think we can say that there are, as a rule of thumb, that more urgent needs take precedence over less urgent ones, those of the more over those of the fewer, even though that makes me sound like a character from Star Trek. Yes, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or of the one. And prevention of a certain loss over a possible one. In other words, to deprive someone who is known to be a dangerous criminal of the right to freedom by putting them in prison would be an important act, because otherwise it would jeopardize the need for life and safety of many others. But to do the same thing to someone, just on the grounds that you never know, that person might later on prove to be a criminal, would be a discordant act, because you are causing a certain loss to prevent a possible one. And then this brings me to the last principle, and the one that brings me the most hope. Nothing against the will can last. This makes me feel that when people like Gandhi said things like the way of truth and love has always won, and that tyrants and murderers, even though for a time they seem invincible, in the end always fall. Or when Martin Luther King expressed his famous quote, actually from the abolitionist minister Theodore Parker, that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. They were not expressing blind faith or naive optimism. They were expressing a demonstrable truth. Because an accordant society, one that concerns itself with meeting the basic needs of everyone, works in harmony with the fundamentals of human nature. And perhaps not everyone, but at least a critical mass of people will voluntarily cooperate with it, realizing that by benefiting themselves, they benefit others, and by benefiting others, they benefit themselves. They need never fear the truth, and they promote psychological well-being for everyone. By contrast, a discordant system that aims to meet the needs of others, of some, while denying the needs of others, this goes against our innate moral sentiments, and it has to be maintained by coercion, and it depends on keeping people in the dark, in many cases, about its true intention. It causes psychological harm. Of course, to those who are on the receiving end of oppression, that it's going to cause psychological harm is a given, but also those on the giving end. Like, if, as you understand, if you listen to the testimony of people who have been the instruments of oppression, like either guards in concentration camps or members of the military and police of apartheid South Africa, it took a tremendous psychological toll, not just on the victims of the system, but also on those who are charged with upholding the system. So this system requires a tremendously costly, deceptive, and ultimately harmful apparatus to maintain. So the minute that apparatus can no longer be maintained, the system collapses. So when we say that the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice, that can be proven. And within religious traditions as well, not all religious traditions are created equal. And some are accordant and some are discordant. So, in my view, an accordant religion is one that realizes that the focal point of our worship is something that transcends human understanding, that we will always see through a glass darkly, as long as we are in this mortal body. Therefore, we approach it with humility, recognizing the limits of our own understanding. And we also approach other traditions with humility, recognizing that although we act according to the divine will, as best we understand it, our understanding is imperfect, and we don't have a monopoly on the truth. Other traditions may also contain truth. That humanity is not to be divided into the in-group and the out-group, the saved and the lost, the chosen and the unchosen, but we affirm the dignity of every human being. I seem to remember hearing those words before. Oh yes, from the baptismal covenant, to emphasize compassion over arbitrary rules. The letter kills, but the spirit gives life. And to meet human needs in the present world. Like once going through the Gospels and looking at what it said about the Acts of the Disciples, one thing struck me. There are several passages that talk about the disciples going out, healing the sick, and preaching the word. There are some that talk about the disciples going out and healing the sick only.
Okay.
There are no passages that talk about the disciples going out and preaching only. that when Jesus said, "Hey, go out and minister to the hungry and to the sick," so that was the primary injunction. Preaching was secondary. Now, as I was introduced, I belong to a Franciscan order. And St. Francis of Assisi, he is supposed to have said, preach the word, preach the gospel, if necessary, use words. And that was sort of a condensation of a story that's told about him, that he went with one of his brothers into a certain town and said, okay, let's go to this town and preach. And they walked in through one gate. At one point, they found a lost child and reunited with its mother. They went a little farther, found a starving person and gave him bread. At one point, they found a sick person and took him to a doctor. Then they reached the far gate, and the brother said to St. Francis, "Oh, weren't we going to preach?" And Francis said, "We did." And above all else, promotes peace. Boy, this looks an awful lot like the Episcopal Church. So to sum up, the principles that I've expressed so far, so that the future of the world is determined by the will of human beings, which is to meet their basic needs, and therefore the will of the world works towards an equilibrium where all people's basic needs are met.
Okay.
The rule of reflection is a moral universal, and even though we naturally follow it among our kin, we do sometimes need help extending it past the boundaries of kinship. And most of the discordance in the world arises from the great error: conflicts result with the least possible loss, and nothing against the will minimized. Now, when I put it this way, I don't feel that I'm saying anything new. All of this information is already out there, and some of it seems so obvious as to go without saying. But I'll close with a quote from Samuel Johnson, that people don't necessarily need to be instructed as often as they need to be reminded. And sometimes I feel that in today's world, maybe a few reminders are in order. Thank you very much.
Okay,
Yes,
question?
I'm
Sure.
sorry, I'd like to open the floor briefly for questions and comments.
You're salient because today is the 80th anniversary of the bombing of Nagasaki. Hard to figure out where that fits in. That's one thing I just wanted to say. The second is about whether or not we tended toward good or evil. Sort of put wonders where here's God who takes a look at the Garden of Eden and says, "Uh-oh, I've got my work cut out for me, because here are these people who just screwed up everything." So I'm not so sure that we have a constant tendency toward the good. That's all.
Okay. Yeah,
Well, yes, and that word constant, I'm not sure of that either. Like, yes, we are capable of great evil. And I feel that the story of Adam and Eve in the garden, like, our creation story addresses a question that I think is also addressed by other creation stories in traditions all around the world. If you look at others, you find that the central question in so many of them is, what went wrong? Like, if this world was created as a home for us by a god or gods in some cases who love us, why is life so hard? Why is the world such a dangerous place? And why are people such jerks? So the creation story of Adam and Eve in the garden, I think, is one way of explaining that. And there are so many ways that one could interpret that story. And one way that was salient for me was when God said to Eve, or when God said to Adam, "What have you done?" Adam said, "Well, Eve gave me this fruit." And when God said to Eve, "What have you done?" she said, "Well, the serpent beguiled me." I've seen that interpreted as, well, maybe original sin is the unwillingness to take responsibility for your own foul-ups. And yes, to get to your other point, I live in Japan, and the day we left Japan to come to San Diego, actually, that day began for us with watching on TV the ceremony marking the 80th anniversary of the bombing in Kowalski. So, definitely one of the darker chapters in the history of humanity. It's one of the times when the great error and the tribal mind overcame us so completely that we thought exterminating 100,000 people in an instant was an acceptable sacrifice for this goal of achieving our objectives. But yes, from there we went on to, we've been working on correcting the equilibrium, and the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki have been at the forefront of that. And last year, the survivors of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombing, by this point there are very few of them left. Their average age is 86, but that group was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for their work towards a world without nuclear weapons. There is hope for us. Yes?
Your talk reminded me of a case in a negotiation class that I took once, where you were negotiating about how many oranges people A got versus people B got, and a person would live for every orange you got versus dot. And so it turns out to be, it looks like a zero-sum game unless you share everything that you know about your people. In your case, it turns out that one island needs the peel and one island needs the flesh. And if you negotiate perfectly, everybody lives. Otherwise, it's choosing how many die.
Yeah, interesting. I've seen that before, with a different focus. The idea being seek first to understand. So in that case, it was two people competing for one orange, and the idea was who has the greater right to the orange. And then what they didn't tell you at first is that one person needs the peel and the other needs the flesh. So once you have communicated and you understand that, then everybody thinks otherwise it's a zero-sum game. So, yes?
Could you kind of unpack and give me a good response to that nice little rhyme, might makes right?
Well, that's kind of hard, because to me that's absurd on the face of it. Yeah, but there are some people who believe it, and, well, one response I've seen to that was, would you still feel that way if you weren't the one who had the might? Because unless you consider yourself the mightiest human being on the face of the earth, there will be someone mightier than you. And would you say that that rule applies to them with respect to you? If not, then you need to rethink your standard. Yes, sir?
Yeah, what do you mean? Also, what do you mean by right?
Yeah. So you know what I mean by right. Yes, right.
So I really appreciate how the 8 principles remind us the importance of caring for creation, speaking of creation, because all of them depend on a healthy environment.
Yes.
And care for all creation.
Yes.
Thank you for that justification.
Yeah. And I would also say, I was focusing here mainly on human relations, but according to Duvall's principle, as you saw, there is another level even broader than all humanity, which is all living things. And so someone who was living in a perfectly accordant life would extend their compassion even to non-human animals and plants, and then care for creation, like caring for those outside of our kinship. Yes, it applies across space. You could also say it applies across time. Just not to consider just others that are alive now, but future generations. And that the accordant life includes leaving a livable world for the next generation. So care for creation is also very much a part of this, even though I didn't say so explicitly. Yes?
I just wanted to remember the study of the chimpanzees. There was Jane Goodall. I was thinking about that when you showed the two monkeys. I just remember if you remember that one, Jane Goodall. I just was a comment. That's all.
No. Yes, do you?
I like that. What Samuel Johnson said, people need to be reminded. But every year, we need to really teach this in our churches, also in the classroom, because the younger generation are being lack the discipline and instruction of what is good, what is evil.
Okay, well, I'll close by saying, I think I read somewhere that speaking about relationships, even with bananas, we share about like 50% of our genes. Because of the metabolism, necessity of life. So even protecting bananas, you have something in common.
Well, we're closer to the minions than we thought.
Yes, exactly. So anyway, let's thank Charles again for wonderful.
Okay, next week we are privileged to have some members from Braver Angels, which is a nationwide organization that seeks to provide people with skills and opportunities to have productive conversations across different points of view. The local alliance is very active, and they're going to give a workshop entitled Depolarizing Within, which just means in polarizing situations, how do we depolarize ourselves, watch out for the emotional triggers that get us not able to hear each other, and that this will be presented from a Christian perspective. Other part, half marathon next weekend. So check the race course on the website, figure out if there's any problem, figure out how to get here. I'm going to say the half marathon is sometimes harder to get here, at least from where we are in Claremont, than the marathon because of the way the course is. So if you want to come, do your homework beforehand, figure out how to get here. But please come. Braver Angels is a great organization. I think you'll be very, very inspired by the presentation. Thank you.